A quiet welcome to Restful Historian. Tonight, we'll explore the fascinating story of Japan's most iconic warriors, the samurai, and the ever-changing world they inhabited for over 7 centuries. From their early beginnings as humble provincial guards, through their peak as powerful rulers who shaped a nation, and finally to their quiet adaptation in an era of lasting peace, the samurai left an indelible mark on Japan's culture, its very concept of honor, and its deepest traditions. We'll allow the gentle flow of history to carry us through periods of great change and profound stability, always maintaining a quiet and calming narrative. Imagine the serene landscapes, the bustling castle towns, the ancient rituals, and the intricate daily lives that shaped this incredible nation. There's no need to rush, no need to strain your thoughts. Just breathe softly, and let the whispers of history unfold around you, inviting a profound sense of calm. Our journey will begin far back, long before the samurai truly rose to their prominent power, in the very early days of Japan itself. We'll gently set the stage by understanding the foundations upon which this complex society was built, observing the early emperors and the first subtle whispers of a warrior class beginning to stir. So, relax your mind, and let's ease into tonight's story together. The story of Japan, in its deepest roots, begins with the whispers of ancient myths, tales of gods shaping the land, and the patient, deliberate work of nature itself. Long before powerful warrior clans or strict social codes, there was simply the land, waiting to be lived upon. Imagine a vast, shimmering ocean. From its depths, over countless ages, a beautiful chain of volcanic islands slowly rose. Shaped by the mighty forces of fire and water, these islands emerged mist-shrouded, incredibly green, and teeming with a unique, wild beauty. Today, we know them as Japan. This special geography, with its towering mountains, deep forests, and abundant coastline rich with fish and resources, would not only provide for its earliest inhabitants but also, in time, help to forge a truly unique culture, somewhat set apart from the rest of the world. Our earliest, quiet glimpses into the human story on these islands come from the Jomon period, an amazingly long time that stretches back tens of thousands of years, a period of history even before any writing existed. Picture early people living simply as hunter-gatherers. They followed the rhythms of the seasons, skillfully hunting deer and wild boar in the forests, gathering nuts, berries, and roots from the fertile land, and fishing abundantly in the rich rivers and seas. Their lives were deeply connected to the natural world, living with its cycles rather than trying to control them. They didn't build big cities or have strict leaders. Instead, they lived in small, peaceful communities, moving their camps with the changing availability of food. What truly sets the Jomon people apart is their incredibly detailed pottery, which is among the very oldest known in the entire world. Imagine carefully crafted clay pots, often decorated with unique rope-like patterns, which is what Jomon literally means, used for cooking and storing food, showing remarkable artistry and skill even in these very early times. They also shaped clever tools from stone, bone, and wood, always adapting to their environment. Then, gradually, a new way of life began to emerge, quietly but profoundly changing everything. Around 300 BC, new people started to arrive from the Asian mainland, crossing the seas and bringing with them a truly revolutionary idea, the cultivation of rice. This was a quiet revolution, as it transformed the scattered hunter-gatherer groups. Instead of moving around, people began to settle down, forming permanent villages. Imagine communities working together, digging careful waterways to flood their rice fields, nurturing the precious grains. This Yayoi period, as it's known, saw the slow but steady rise of more organized societies. People built special granaries to store their valuable harvests, developed more advanced tools made of bronze and iron, and began to create the first basic social structures. This meant some people might have more responsibility or a little more power than others, perhaps guiding the shared work of farming or settling disagreements. Life became less about the immediate hunt and more about the careful, long-term cultivation of the earth, fostering a deeper connection to specific places and demanding that communities work together in new, more complex ways. From these early farming roots, the first stirrings of even more complex societies began to take shape. Villages grew into larger settlements, and soon, small chieftaincies or clans began to emerge, each with its own local influence and territory. These early groups often built simple defenses like moats or earthen walls around their villages. This period, marked by the slow, almost unnoticeable gathering of people and power, quietly laid the groundwork for something greater to come. It was a time of hidden growth, of communities slowly understanding their combined strength and the need for stronger leadership, paving the way for the eventual unification of these scattered lands under a single, overarching authority. And so, as the mist of prehistory gently parts, we begin to discern the faint outlines of a new era, an era where these emerging communities would grow, combine, and eventually give rise to the first true state of Japan. Our journey continues, as we now turn our attention to the rise of the Yamato state. As farming life took hold and small local groups began to grow stronger, a special area in what is now Noro Prefecture started to become very important. This was the Yamato Plain, a rich and fertile land where a powerful family, the Yamato clan, slowly but surely began to lead their neighbors. Imagine their leaders. They weren't yet grand emperors, but they were smart chiefs who made alliances by marrying into other powerful families. When they needed to, they showed their strength in quiet ways, making sure others followed their lead. This wasn't a sudden takeover. Instead, it was a gradual drawing together, a slow weaving of different communities into one. The Yamato leaders were very good at using religious beliefs to support their rule. They especially focused on the sun goddess, Amaterasu Omikami. They claimed that their family line came directly from her. This idea gave their new state a deep sense of being chosen by the gods. It suggested that their rule was not just earthly, but planned by divine powers. This belief, that the emperor was a direct descendant of the sun goddess, became a key part of Japanese tradition and lasted for hundreds of years. During this important time, known as the Kofun period, which simply means old mound, we see huge proof of the Yamato's growing power. This proof comes in the form of immense burial mounds. These tombs, shaped like a keyhole and some of the biggest in the world, were built for their rulers and important people. They were filled with treasures and special objects. Imagine the huge effort and organization it took to build these massive earthworks. They truly show the strong, central power and large number of workers the Yamato leaders could command. Inside these mounds, beautiful iron swords, shiny bronze mirrors, and clay figures called haniwa tell stories of their beliefs, their skilled work, and how their society was organized. New ideas began to flow gently into Japan, like currents shaping the coastline. These ideas came first from the Korean peninsula, and later directly from China. These weren't invasions, but rather cultural exchanges that deeply influenced the developing Yamato state. People who could write, skilled artists, and Buddhist monks arrived. They brought with them the deep wisdom of Buddhism, a clever new writing system, Chinese characters, and advanced ways to run a government. The Yamato court didn't just copy these foreign influences. They thought carefully about them and adapted them. They welcomed Buddhism, not just as a religion, but as a smart way of thinking that could make their power stronger and bring the country together. They started to use Chinese ways of running the government. This created a more organized system with clear laws and different government jobs. This change was often led by important figures like Prince Shotoku, a respected leader and regent in the early 7th century. He famously created the 17-article constitution. This was a set of moral and political rules that, while not a modern constitution, gave a framework for good leadership. It stressed harmony and respect for authority. By the start of the 7th and 8th centuries, the Yamato state had truly secured its position. They had a clear territory, a ruling family with divine right, a growing legal system, and greater skill in writing and managing things. The stage was set for a more refined and elaborate society, where the subtle ways of court life and support for art would grow. The first seeds of a distinct Japanese identity, cared for in the fertile Yamato plains, were now ready to blossom into a magnificent cultural bloom, and with that, we turn our gaze towards the elegant and artistic era known as the Heian period. After building its strong foundations, the Japanese court, in the year 794, made a very important choice. They decided to move the capital city to a new place. This new city was carefully designed and built to look grand, much like the great imperial cities of China. This new city, first called Heiankyo, or capital of peace and tranquility, would eventually be known as Kyoto. This move marked the beginning of the Heian period, a time lasting nearly 4 centuries, from 794 to 1185. It celebrated as a golden age of culture, art, and refined beauty. Imagine a city laid out in a perfect grid, mirroring the order of the heavens, with grand palaces, elegant homes for nobles, and peaceful gardens. Here, far from the rough realities of the countryside and the demands of military work, the emperor's court became the clear center of culture and power. The focus shifted from expanding Japan outwards to developing its inner life, fostering a deep love for beauty, poetry, and complex social customs. At the heart of this world was the emperor. He was honored as a divine figure. However, his actual political power often became less direct, slowly shifting to powerful noble families, especially the Fujiwara clan. The Fujiwara were masters at ruling indirectly. They married their daughters into the imperial family, ensuring their grandsons would become emperors. They then became regents, acting rulers, for child emperors, effectively controlling major decisions. They also made sure their family members held all the important jobs at court. This was a system of subtle influence, where political power was used through whispers in hallways and clever moves behind elegant silk screens, rather than through open shows of force. Life for the Heian nobles was like a carefully planned dance of beauty and rules. Beauty was most important. This included everything from the layers of silk worn by noblewomen, with each color chosen for a special meaning, to the elegant handwriting used to write poems. The ability to write a perfect waka poem, a type of Japanese poetry, or to play a koto, a stringed instrument, with great skill was often valued more than military ability. Courtiers spent their days enjoying art, playing elaborate games, and following strict rules of good manners. They lived in large homes with beautiful, carefully designed gardens, where the changing seasons were celebrated with poetry gatherings and viewing parties. This era also saw the flourishing of truly Japanese ways of expression. While Chinese culture was still influential, the Heian court began to develop its own unique style. A very important step was the creation of kana, a phonetic writing system created from parts of Chinese characters. This simplified writing allowed Japanese literature to truly blossom, especially for women, who often used kana to express themselves freely. It was during this time that Lady Murasaki Shikibu wrote the tale of Genji, often called the world's first novel. This long and detailed book gives an amazing look into the complex emotional lives, social customs, and delicate feelings of the Heian nobles, showing a world of love, longing, and the sad beauty of things that don't last forever. Buddhism continued to change, giving rise to new types of teachings that offered comfort and understanding. Esoteric Buddhism, with its complex rituals and sacred drawings, became popular among the nobles. Meanwhile, the simpler message of Pure Land Buddhism, which focused on faith for salvation, began to appeal to ordinary people. These spiritual ideas deeply shaped the art, buildings, and daily lives of the people, adding a layer of deep thought to the era's refined beauty. However, beneath this peaceful and culturally brilliant surface, a quiet but important shift was happening. As the court became more and more focused on its own refined world, its control over the distant provinces began to weaken. Landowners, seeking protection and independence, started to rely less on the faraway capital and more on local strongmen. These local lords, in turn, began to raise their own private armies, training men skilled in archery and horsemanship. These were the early beginnings of the warrior class, the very individuals who would one day challenge the delicate balance of Heian courtly life. The calm beauty of Heian was, in truth, a fragile bubble. As the centuries passed, the disconnect between the elegant court and the rising power in the provinces grew wider and wider. The stage was slowly, almost without anyone noticing, being set for a dramatic conflict, one that would completely change who held power in Japan and bring in the age of the warrior. And so, the gentle currents of this golden age begin to ripple, hinting at the rougher waters ahead, leading us inevitably to the Genpei War and the rise of the samurai. As the Heian court became more and more focused on its world of poetry and refined manners, a different kind of power was quietly growing in the distant parts of the country. Here, far from the elegant capital, the large landowning families, often related to the imperial family themselves, began to form their own private armies. They needed protection for their huge estates and the resources they controlled, as the central government's power grew weaker and weaker. These were the men who would become the samurai, a name that comes from the word saburao, which means to serve. They were more than just fighters, they were loyal helpers, fiercely dedicated to their lords, living by a developing code of honor and strict discipline. For many centuries, these warrior families had kept a delicate balance. Sometimes they served the court, and sometimes they fought amongst themselves. But by the middle of the 12th century, two immensely powerful warrior families rose to clear prominence: the Taira, also known as the Haika, and the Minamoto, also known as the Genji. Both of these clans had roots in the imperial family, but they had been moved away from court duties and sent to the provinces, where they built their power bases. Their rivalry simmered for decades, marked by smaller fights and political moves within Kyoto. But in the year 1180, this tension finally exploded into a full-scale, devastating conflict known as the Genpei War. Imagine the quiet beauty of the Heian world suddenly shattered by the clash of swords, the thunder of horses' hooves, and the cries of battle. This was more than just a war over land or power, it was a struggle for the very heart and soul of Japan, a clash between the refined, courtly ways of the past and the emerging, fighting spirit of the future. The war lasted for 5 turbulent years, affecting much of Japan. Battles were fought on land and sea, from the snow-covered mountains in the north to the dangerous waterways in the west. The story of the Genpei War is filled with legendary figures: the tragic, brilliant Minamoto General Minamoto no Yoshitsune, whose clever battle plans were matched only by his sad loyalty, and the stoic, but ultimately doomed, Taira clan, led by their powerful leader, Taira no Kiyomori. Tales of their bravery, their honor, and their final sacrifice would be told throughout Japanese history for centuries, forever remembered in epic stories like the tale of the Haika. The war ended with a decisive naval battle in 1185, at Dan-no-Yura, in the narrow strait separating the main islands of Honshu and Kyushu. Here, the Minamoto forces, led by Minamoto no Yoritomo, delivered a crushing blow to the Taira fleet. It was a dramatic and sad end. Many Taira warriors and even the young Emperor Antoku died in the waves, taking the sacred imperial symbols with them. The victory of the Minamoto clan completely changed Japan. It clearly showed the permanent decline of the noble court's political power and the definite rise of the warrior class. Minamoto no Yoritomo, the victorious leader, chose not to set up his government in the elegant capital of Kyoto, where the court's influence still lingered. Instead, he wisely set up his military headquarters in Kamakura, a coastal town far to the east, closer to his traditional power base. This decision was monumental. It marked the end of an era known for poetic beauty and brought in a new age where military strength and strict governance would take control. Yoritomo, now the supreme military commander, or shogun, would establish a new form of government, the shogunate, that would effectively rule Japan for the next 700 years. The samurai, no longer just guards in the provinces, were now the clear masters of the land. Their ideals of loyalty, discipline, and fighting skill would shape the very core of Japanese society. And so, as the echoes of the Genpei War fade, we are now firmly in the age of the warrior. Our next chapter will explore how this powerful new military government, the Kamakura Shogunate, was established and how it worked. With the dramatic victory of the Minamoto clan in the Genpei War, a new chapter began for Japan. Minamoto no Yoritomo, who had led them to triumph, understood that true power could no longer stay only with the elegant, but increasingly out of touch, imperial court in Kyoto. So, in 1192, he received the title of Sei Taishigun, or Great General who subdues the barbarians. We simply know him as Shogun. This title was much more than just ceremonial. It meant he had set up a new, military-led government called a shogunate. This new government was based not in Kyoto, but in the important coastal town of Kamakura. Imagine this new center of power, Kamakura, a busy military headquarters, far removed from the refined art of the old capital. Here, Yoritomo began to build a strong system of government designed to control the warrior class and bring stability to the land. This was a feudal system, much like those found in other parts of the world, where power was shared but ultimately came from the shogun. Yoritomo created the bakufu, or tent government. This name cleverly made people think of a military camp, showing its strong warrior nature. Inside the bakufu, he set up new government groups, the samurai dokoro, which was in charge of his warrior followers and their rules, the mandokoro, which handled general government tasks and money, and the monchujo, which acted as a court for appeals and legal matters. These institutions laid the groundwork for a stable, long-lasting military rule. His plan for controlling the many warriors was simple but effective. He chose loyal samurai to be shugo, like military governors, to oversee the provinces, and jit, estate managers, to look after private lands. These jobs gave trusted warriors important local power. This made sure they stayed loyal and allowed the shogun's influence to spread across the whole country. In return for their service, these samurai received grants of land, or the right to collect money from land, which secured their wealth. However, the Kamakura shogunate's leadership saw some changes. After Yoritomo's death in 1199, a new, powerful family quietly rose to importance behind the scenes, the Hojo clan. The Hojo were the family of Yoritomo's wife, Mosoko. They skillfully managed who would become shogun next, effectively becoming regents, people who rule for a young leader, for the young shoguns. This meant they slowly gained the true power within the shogunate. Hojo Mosoko, known as the Nun Shogun, was a strong political force herself, showing remarkable influence and strength in a world mostly run by men. Under Hojo leadership, the Kamakura system became stronger and more efficient. The Kamakura period was also a time of important cultural and religious growth. With the rise of the samurai, a simpler, more direct form of Buddhism deeply connected with the warrior class. Zen Buddhism, brought from China, became especially popular. Its focus on discipline, meditation, self-reliance, and direct understanding, rather than complex texts, directly appealed to the samurai's practical and fighting way of life. Imagine warriors finding spiritual strength and clear thinking through strict meditation, seeking understanding not in faraway heavens, but within their own minds amidst the challenges of life. Zen's influence would become very deep, shaping not only samurai thinking but also Japanese art, garden design, and the tea ceremony. The stability of the Kamakura Shogunate faced a truly huge outside threat, the Mongol invasions. In 1274 and again in 1281, the enormous Mongol Empire, led by Kublai Khan, sent massive fleets to invade Japan. These were forces that had conquered much of Asia, and their arrival sent shockwaves across the islands. Samurai from all over Japan set aside their own differences and bravely defended their shores. Yet, it wasn't only their fighting skill that saved Japan. On both occasions, powerful storms, famously known as kamikaze, or divine winds, swept through the ocean straits, scattering and destroying the Mongol fleets. This divine help deeply strengthened the belief in Japan's unique, sacred protection, and boosted the authority of the shogunate, which had successfully united the nation. Despite pushing back the Mongols, the long and costly defense put a heavy strain on the shogunate's money. The system of rewarding loyal samurai with new land became hard to keep up, leading to growing unhappiness among the warriors. As the 14th century began, the careful balance of power that Yoritomo had set up started to break down. Emperor Go-Daigo, wanting to bring back the emperor's power, started a rebellion. This, combined with the growing unhappiness among many samurai, eventually led to the fall of the Kamakura Shogunate in 1333. The time of direct military rule from Kamakura came to an end, but its legacy was profound. It had fundamentally changed Japan from a society ruled by nobles to one dominated by warriors, laying the deep groundwork for the samurai's lasting influence. As the Kamakura system ended, a new era of regional power struggles and a different kind of shogunate would soon emerge. Our journey now leads us into the complexities of the Muromachi period and the Ashikaga shogunate. The fall of the Kamakura shogunate in 1333 didn't immediately bring a new, united Japan. Instead, it led to a short but troubled time known as the Kenmu Restoration. Emperor Go-Daigo, who had led the fight against Kamakura, tried to bring back direct imperial rule, dreaming of returning to the days of the Heian court. However, his plan didn't work well. He didn't properly reward the powerful samurai who had helped him, and his traditional court advisors didn't understand how to govern a land ruled by warriors. From this discontent, a new warrior leader emerged, Ashikaga Takauji. At first, he was a loyal general to Emperor Go-Daigo. But Takauji grew frustrated with the emperor's failures and the lack of recognition for the samurai. He eventually turned against the emperor, driving him from Kyoto and setting up his own rival emperor. This led to a remarkable and complex time known as the Northern and Southern Courts, Nambokucho. For nearly 60 years, two imperial lines existed at the same time, each claiming to be the rightful one. One was supported by the Ashikaga, and the other by those loyal to Go-Daigo. In 1338, Ashikaga Takauji officially became shogun. He established his new military government, the Ashikaga Shogunate, in the Muromachi district of Kyoto. This was a very important choice. Unlike Kamakura, which was separate from the imperial court, Muromachi was built right into the imperial capital. While this brought together warrior and courtly culture again, it also meant the shogunate often got caught up in the complex politics of the imperial city. The Ashikaga shogunate ruled differently from the Kamakura one. While it had a strong presence in Kyoto, its control over the distant provinces was often weaker. Power began to spread out, shifting more significantly into the hands of powerful regional lords, known as daimyo. These daimyo, often former military governors appointed by the shogunate, gained greater independence. They built their own fortified castles, raised their own armies, and controlled their own lands. The shogunate in Kyoto relied more on alliances and keeping a balance of power among these increasingly independent lords than on direct, central control. Despite this spreading of political power, the Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573, was a time of extraordinary cultural growth. The Ashikaga shoguns, especially the third shogun, Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, and the eighth, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, were passionate supporters of the arts. They blended the spiritual depth of Zen Buddhism with the elegant beauty of courtly life. This blend gave birth to what are often called Kitayama Bunka, Northern Mountain culture, and Higoshiyama Bunka, Eastern Mountain culture, named after their magnificent villas. Imagine the peaceful beauty of the Kinkakuji, the Golden Pavilion, built by Yoshimitsu as his retirement home, its shimmering gold leaf reflecting in the pond. Or the quiet, simple elegance of the Ginkakuji, the Silver Pavilion, built by Yoshimasa. It was designed to show a deep feeling of wabi-sabi, the beauty found in things that are imperfect, temporary, and simple. This era saw the development of many famous Japanese art forms. There was Zen ink painting, sumi, known for its simple brushstrokes and deep philosophical meaning. The refined beauty of the tea ceremony, chinoyu, which became a meditative ritual focusing on harmony, respect, purity, and calmness. The dramatic and symbolic no theater, with its masked actors and slow, expressive movements, often drawing on old tales and Buddhist ideas. Also, the subtle art of flower arranging, ikebana, and the exquisite skill of garden design, creating miniature landscapes for quiet thought. These cultural changes spread beyond just the elite. They subtly influenced the wider society. The warrior class, the samurai, were now not only skilled in fighting but also increasingly appreciated these refined arts, often practicing them themselves. The ideal samurai of this era was not just a strong fighter but also someone who enjoyed poetry, art, and the tea ceremony, showing a balanced pursuit of both fighting skills and beauty. However, as the 15th century came to a close, the delicate balance of power under the Ashikaga shogunate began to fall apart. The shoguns became weaker, and their control over the ambitious daimyo lessened. Fights within the Ashikaga family and rivalries among powerful provincial lords broke out into open conflict. The key event was the Onin War, from 1467 to 1477. This was a devastating civil war fought mostly within Kyoto itself, leaving the capital in ruins and taking away almost all of the shogunate's remaining authority. The Onin War effectively ended the Ashikaga's ability to govern the entire country. The fragile peace gave way to widespread chaos and constant warfare. The stage was now set for the most turbulent period in Japanese history, an age where the mighty daimyo would fight for complete control, and the land would be caught in endless conflict. This era of relentless struggle would be known as the Sengoku period, the age of warring states. As the Ashikaga shogunate, after its long and culturally rich time, fell apart after the terrible Onin War, the delicate system of central power completely broke down. Imagine Kyoto, the old imperial capital, once a place of elegant court life, now a battleground. Its temples and noble homes were burned to ashes. This was more than just a war, it was the true end of an old way of life, throwing Japan into a century and a half of constant civil unrest. This period, from the mid-1400s to the early 1600s, became known as the Sengoku period, or the Age of Warring States, a name that perfectly describes its endless, violent breaking apart. Picture a land broken into hundreds of independent areas. Each was ruled by an ambitious and powerful daimyo, a feudal lord. These daimyo no longer served a distant shogun or a powerless emperor. They were independent rulers within their own lands, constantly fighting for control, wealth, and influence. The idea of loyalty became flexible, often changing with new opportunities. This was a time of gekkokujo, a deep and unsettling social change, meaning the low overthrowing the high. Trusted followers might betray their lords to get ahead, ambitious sons might remove their fathers, and even common people, through sheer determination, fighting talent, or cleverness, could rise from nowhere to positions of great power. The old, strict social order, passed down from the Heian and Kamakura periods, was violently shaken. It was replaced by a harsh system where only the strongest, most adaptable, and most cunning survived. Alliances were made and broken incredibly quickly, and the constant threat of spies and betrayal from within hung over every castle. Life during the Sengoku period was undeniably harsh. It was marked by constant uncertainty, the ever-present threat of war, and its devastating impact on ordinary people. Farmers faced being forced into armies, heavy taxes to pay for soldiers, and the destruction of their livelihoods. Yet, strangely, this time of chaos also sparked amazing new ideas and energy. To support their armies, feed their people, and manage their lands, daimyo invested heavily in improvements. They encouraged better farming methods, like new ways to water crops and the introduction of new plants. They also supported trade and skilled crafts, creating bustling jokomachi, or castle towns, that grew up around fortified strongholds. These towns became lively centers of business, attracting merchants, craftspeople, and skilled workers. Merchants, despite their traditionally low social standing, gained immense new importance and wealth, helping trade goods, weapons, and supplies. The economy, in a strange twist of fate, saw significant growth, with the development of markets within the country, standardized money, and improved, though often dangerous, roads. It was into this unstable mix that a truly revolutionary technology arrived on Japan's distant shores. In 1543, a Chinese ship, carrying 3 Portuguese traders, was blown off course by a storm and landed unexpectedly on the small, remote island of Tanegashima. With them, they brought something entirely new to Japan: firearms, specifically the arquebus, a basic but deadly musket that used a matchlock. Imagine the initial awe, fear, and sheer curiosity these weapons must have caused. The samurai, who for centuries had relied on their swords, bows, and spears, quickly realized the immense, game-changing power of this new technology. Within just a few decades, Japanese craftspeople, with incredible skill, had not only figured out how these foreign weapons worked but were mass-producing them in huge numbers. They adapted them to their own needs and even made them better. The introduction of firearms completely changed warfare. Battles, once dominated by individual samurai duels, charges of horsemen, and organized groups of archers and spearmen, began to shift dramatically. The focus moved towards large groups of foot soldiers. Disciplined groups of arquebusiers could unleash powerful, coordinated shots, breaking enemy lines with unmatched effectiveness. This technological leap demanded entirely new ways of fighting, the need for vast amounts of gunpowder, the development of complex supply lines, and the training of large, specialized units. It also affected castle design, requiring thicker walls and special openings for guns. The loud, terrifying noise and smoke of gunpowder on the battlefield, along with its ability to fell warriors from a distance, added a new psychological element to combat. This forever changed the nature of the samurai's role. Individual fighting skill, while still valued, became less important than overall strategy and the ability to command large, well-equipped armies. Alongside these profound military changes, the spiritual landscape also continued to change and diversify. Christian missionaries, like the famous Jesuit Saint Francis Xavier, arrived with the Europeans in the mid-1500s, introducing Christianity to Japan. While at first tolerated, and even accepted by some daimyo for political or economic reasons, as becoming Christian could open up valuable trade with European powers, the foreign religion would later face growing suspicion and, eventually, harsh suppression. This happened as the leaders who were trying to unify Japan became worried that Christianity could undermine traditional loyalties and central power. Meanwhile, various powerful Buddhist sects continued to hold immense influence. Some, like the Ikoiki, even raised their own formidable armies of warrior monks and farmers, challenging the authority of the daimyo and sometimes fighting full-scale wars against them, notably the long and bloody sieges against Ishiyama Honganji. The Sengoku period, for all its unending chaos and violence, was a crucible that forged powerful and ambitious leaders. From this fragmented landscape of constant conflict, clever alliances, and revolutionary technology, emerged three extraordinary figures. Each had a unique vision and method, and each would, slowly and with great effort, begin the monumental task of bringing the broken nation under a single, overarching authority. Their stories are deeply woven into the very fabric of this chaotic age, rising from the noise of battle and the intricate dance of power to reshape the destiny of Japan. And so, from the ashes of the old order, amidst the constant clang of battle, the whispers of new technologies, and the fervent embrace of new beliefs, the seeds of a new, unified Japan were being sown, tended by the hands of these extraordinary individuals. Our next chapter will turn our attention to these remarkable figures who, against all odds, began to stitch together the disparate threads of the Sengoku period into a single, cohesive nation. From the intense struggles of the Sengoku period, where countless warlords fought for control and society itself seemed ready to break apart, came three remarkable figures. Their ambitions and brilliant minds would forever change Japan's history. These are often called the three great unifiers, and their stories, while different in their style and methods, are deeply connected. They form a powerful, sequential narrative of bringing the country together and eventually creating a new, long-lasting time of peace. They are Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. Each had a unique personality, a different way of approaching power, and faced different challenges. Yet, together, they laid the strong foundation for centuries of never-before-seen stability. First, let us turn to Oda Nobunaga, 1534 to 1582. Imagine a visionary and often harsh leader, bursting onto the chaotic scene from his relatively small, humble domain in Owari province. Nobunaga was more than just a warrior. He was a true innovator, a man seemingly far ahead of his time, with a burning desire to create a new Japan, no matter the cost. His early victories, such as the amazing defeat of Imagawa Yoshimoto at the Battle of Okehazama in 1560, a swift strike against a much larger force, quickly made his reputation formidable. He immediately understood the devastating power of firearms, which had been brought by the Portuguese. He wasn't content with just getting them, he completely changed Japanese warfare. He famously trained large, disciplined groups of arquebusiers, soldiers with early muskets, whom he used with crushing effect. At the key Battle of Nagashino in 1575, imagine the scene: Nobunaga's forces, positioned behind carefully built wooden fences, fired continuous volleys of gunshots at the charging horsemen of the Takeda clan, a strong group known for its fearsome cavalry. This organized, almost industrial use of firearms completely destroyed the enemy, changing the way wars were fought in Japan forever. Nobunaga was not afraid to challenge and break down old power structures that stood in his way. He launched fierce, often brutal campaigns against powerful Buddhist monasteries, like Enryakuji on Mount Hiei. These monasteries had gathered immense wealth, political influence, and even had their own formidable armies of warrior monks. His destruction of these independent centers of power sent a clear message: no group, no matter how sacred, would stand above his authority. He also cleverly controlled important trade routes and promoted economic policies like rakuj rakuichi, or free markets and open guilds. This was to boost trade and weaken the economic power of old monopolies and religious groups, thereby funding his vast military campaigns. His ultimate goal was to unify Japan through sheer military strength, breaking the power of defiant daimyo and bringing all control directly under him. He was bold, decisive, and had little patience for old ways or for those who resisted his will. His ambition was huge, and by 1582, he had conquered a large part of central Japan, seemingly on the very edge of achieving complete unification. However, his journey was suddenly and tragically cut short when he was betrayed by one of his most trusted generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, at the Honji Temple in Kyoto. Imagine the sudden, fiery chaos of the temple, Nobunaga trapped, refusing to surrender, choosing instead to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, to uphold his honor rather than be captured. His sudden death left a huge empty space in the unfolding story of unification. Next, we meet Toyotomi Hideyoshi, 1537 to 1598. Hideyoshi's story is one of the most remarkable and inspiring in all of Japanese history. He rose from the humblest beginnings, a peasant, a simple foot soldier, Ashigaru, even serving as Nobunaga's sandal-bearer, to become the supreme ruler of Japan. His genius lay not just in his military skill, though he was an accomplished general, but in his extraordinary political wisdom, his brilliant diplomacy, and his unmatched organizational abilities. After Nobunaga's shocking death, Hideyoshi quickly took advantage of the moment. He famously made a great return to avenge his lord by crushing Akechi Mitsuhide at the Battle of Yamazaki. This swift act of loyalty and decisiveness solidified his claim as Nobunaga's rightful successor, as he cleverly outmaneuvered other powerful generals who might have fought for control. Hideyoshi completed the unification process not always through brute conquest, but through a masterful mix of clever negotiations, strategic marriages, careful shows of overwhelming force, and a unique ability to win over former enemies and bring them into his system. Once unified, he put in place a series of deep changes to ensure lasting peace and central control. He famously conducted the sword hunt, katanagari, systematically taking weapons away from farmers across the nation. Imagine his order: all non-samurai had to surrender their weapons, which were then melted down and supposedly used to make a giant Buddha statue, a symbolic act of peace and separation. This prevented future peasant rebellions and firmly secured the samurai's sole control over military force. He also carried out detailed land surveys, taiko kenkai, across the entire country. These careful surveys precisely mapped land holdings, figured out how much they could produce, and set fixed tax rates, directly connecting the farmers to the central government. This system not only ensured efficient tax collection but also broke the last bits of old feudal loyalties, making it harder for daimyo to avoid central control. Furthermore, he strictly enforced a rigid class system, formally separating samurai from farmers, craftspeople, and merchants, limiting social movement and thus creating the foundation for the Tokugawa era's fixed social order. Hideyoshi built magnificent, sprawling castles, like the awe-inspiring Osaka Castle, as symbols of his power and as strategic administrative centers. He also encouraged a grand, lavish culture, enjoying rich displays, supporting the tea ceremony with gold-plated tea rooms, and projecting an image of immense wealth and prestige to make his rule seem legitimate, despite his humble origins. His ambition, however, led him to his ultimate mistake: two ill-fated invasions of Korea in the 1590s. These massive, costly campaigns, aimed at showing Japan's power on the continent and perhaps even conquering China, ultimately drained Japan's resources and ended in devastating failure due to fierce Korean resistance, especially Admiral Yi Sun-sin's brilliant naval victories and intervention from Ming China. Despite these problems and the exhaustion caused by the Korean ventures, Hideyoshi left behind a unified, though still fragile and restless, Japan for his successor. Finally, we arrive at Tokugawa Ieyasu, 1543 to 1616. Ieyasu was arguably the most patient, calculating, and ultimately successful of the three unifiers. He was a master survivor, having spent years as a hostage in his youth, first with the Imagawa clan, then with Oda Nobunaga. These early experiences taught him the hard lessons of power, the complexities of alliances, and the crucial importance of being careful and thinking long-term about strategy. Unlike Nobunaga's swift harshness or Hideyoshi's rapid rise, Ieyasu built his power base slowly, methodically, and very carefully. After Hideyoshi gave him the vast Kanto region, which included what would become Edo, following his campaign against the Hojo clan, Ieyasu used this rich, fertile land to build a strong economic foundation, develop a powerful and loyal network of followers, and increase his military strength, always waiting for the right moment. He often allied himself strategically, sometimes with Nobunaga, sometimes with Hideyoshi, learning from their strengths and weaknesses, always with an eye on the ultimate prize. After Hideyoshi's death in 1598, a power vacuum, an empty space of power, naturally appeared. Hideyoshi had tried to set up a council of regents for his young son, Hideyori, but Ieyasu, having carefully prepared for this moment, seized his opportunity. The nation split into two major sides: the Eastern Army, loyal to Ieyasu, and the Western Army, made up of daimyo loyal to Hideyori and led by Ishida Mitsunari. The decisive moment came in the year 1600, at the epic battle of Sekigahara. Imagine the vast plains, covered in mist, as hundreds of thousands of warriors clashed. It was a battle of shifting loyalties and brilliant strategy. Ieyasu's forces, through clever movements, superior planning, and crucial defections by allied daimyo like Kobayakura Hideyoki during the battle, clearly defeated the Western coalition. This single, monumental victory cemented Ieyasu's supreme position as the undisputed ruler of Japan. With the triumph at Sekigahara, Ieyasu systematically brought his power together. He skillfully removed any remaining opposition and carefully laid the groundwork for a new, lasting shogunate. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused mainly on immediate conquest and personal glory, Ieyasu was driven by a single, profound vision: the creation of a stable, long-lasting peace that would prevent the return of the Sengoku chaos. He meticulously laid the groundwork for a government structure, the Tokugawa Shogunate, that would last for over 2.5 centuries, learning deeply from the failures of past shogunates. His profound legacy was the creation of a centralized, secure, and unusually stable peace that would bring in Japan's longest period of unified rule. Thus, the era of constant warfare was finally brought to a close, not by one, but by the combined, complementary efforts of these three extraordinary men. Oda Nobunaga shattered the old order with his harshness and innovation. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, with his political brilliance and organizational genius, unified the fragmented nation. And Tokugawa Ieyasu, with his patience and foresight, solidified that unity into an enduring system of peace. The nation, having been fragmented for so long, was now ready to enter an age of centralized control and unprecedented order. Our journey now leads us into this meticulously planned new era, the early days of the Tokugawa Shogunate. With his clear, decisive victory at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, Tokugawa Ieyasu firmly secured his place as the supreme power in Japan. Just a few years later, in 1603, he formally received the esteemed title of shogun from the emperor. This momentous event marked the official beginning of the Tokugawa Shogunate, an era that would unfold for over 260 years, bringing with it an unprecedented period of profound peace and remarkable stability to the entire nation. This exceptionally long and tranquil peace is often referred to simply as the Edo period, taking its name from the shogunate's brand new capital. Ieyasu made a very thoughtful and highly strategic choice for his seat of power. Instead of returning to Kyoto, the traditional imperial capital, a city steeped in centuries of aristocratic influence and courtly intrigues, he established his powerful government in Edo. This was a relatively small fishing village situated in the Kanto region, an area he had been meticulously developing and fortifying for decades, long before his ultimate triumph. Imagine Edo, carefully located far from the old noble families and their deep-rooted interests, beginning its astonishing transformation. From a humble village, it grew into one of the world's largest and most vibrant cities, a bustling hub of administration, commerce, and culture. This deliberate move symbolized a definitive and irreversible shift in power, away from the refined but politically weak court in Kyoto, and towards the firm, centralized military rule based decisively in Edo. The true brilliance of the Tokugawa shogunate lay in its incredibly intricate system of control. This vast and complex framework was meticulously designed by Ieyasu and his successors to prevent any return of the terrible chaos and endless warfare that had defined the preceding Sengoku period. They put several key policies in place, all carefully planned to ensure the enduring power of the Tokugawa clan and to guarantee the loyalty and obedience of the great feudal lords, the daimyo. Perhaps the most ingenious of these policies was the alternate attendance system, known as Sankin-keitai. Imagine every daimyo being compelled to spend every other year living in Edo, the shogun's capital. When their year in Edo was complete and they returned to their own distant lands, they were strictly required to leave their primary family members, their wives and firstborn sons, who were their heirs, behind in Edo. These family members effectively served as virtual hostages, ensuring the daimyo's continued loyalty. This clever system served multiple vital purposes. Firstly, it financially drained the daimyo. The immense costs of traveling with large retinues and maintaining grand residences in both Edo and their home domains greatly reduced their ability to gather wealth that might otherwise fund rebellion. Secondly, it undeniably ensured their loyalty, as their beloved families were held securely in Edo under the shogun's watchful eye. And thirdly, it fostered a powerful sense of national unity and control. As daimyo and their huge entourages constantly moved along the major highways of Japan, these roads became arteries of the shogun's power, connecting the many different regions of the country. These journeys became grand, impressive parades, showcasing the daimyo's wealth and prestige, but always, under the watchful, ever-present eye of the shogun. The Tokugawa government also very carefully sorted the daimyo into different groups, a system designed to manage their power. There were Fudai daimyo, who were loyal followers from before Ieyasu's victory at Sekigahara. These loyal lords were often strategically granted important lands near the shogun's own territories, forming a strong, reliable buffer around the central power. Then there were Tazama daimyo, or outsider lords. These were the powerful lords who had either fought against Ieyasu at Sekigahara or only allied with him later, after his power was already established. While these Tazama lords were formidable in their own right, they were often relegated to more distant territories. They were also deliberately excluded from key government positions, carefully limiting their potential to gain central influence or conspire against the shogun. This careful placement and exclusion was a vital part of the Tokugawa strategy to contain any potential threats. Beyond these intricate political controls, the Tokugawa shogunate enforced a very rigid social hierarchy, known as Shinokyo-sho. This system precisely placed the samurai at the absolute top of society, followed by farmers, then artisans, craftsmen, and finally merchants at the bottom. While the samurai, who now mostly lived in bustling castle towns and served as administrators and bureaucrats rather than active warriors, retained their high status and prestige, they were also bound by extremely strict codes of conduct and unwavering loyalty to their lords and the shogun. Farmers, who made up the vast majority of the population, were the bedrock of the economy. Their continuous, diligent labor supported the entire, vast system through their harvests and taxes. Even though artisans and merchants were at the lower end of the social scale, the new era of peace allowed their businesses to thrive, and they gained significant economic power and influence, especially the merchants, who became increasingly wealthy. Perhaps the most striking and defining policy of the early Edo period was the Sengoku, or national isolation policy. This policy was driven by a deep and growing suspicion of foreign influence, particularly Christianity, which they viewed as a dangerous and subversive force that could potentially undermine traditional loyalties to the shogun and cause internal unrest. The shogunate progressively and strictly limited all contact with the outside world. All Europeans, with the singular exception of a small contingent of Dutch traders, were expelled from Japan. Japanese citizens were absolutely forbidden from leaving the country, and those who were already abroad were not allowed to return. Trade was severely restricted, funneled exclusively through a few designated ports like Nagasaki, where only the Dutch and Chinese were allowed highly controlled access to a small, artificial island called Dejima. Imagine Japan becoming a self-contained, secluded world, meticulously shielded from external ideas and influences, allowing its unique culture to flourish without significant foreign intrusion for over 2 centuries. This long era of peace also fostered tremendous economic growth. With the constant warfare finally ended, agriculture thrived, producing abundant harvests. Cities expanded at an astonishing rate, and a vibrant, wealthy merchant class emerged, even though they held a low official social standing. The new stability allowed for the development of sophisticated infrastructure, like improved roads and canals, the widespread use of a unified currency, and the growth of a dynamic domestic market that connected different regions. The early Edo period was, therefore, a profound testament to careful planning, robust control, and a deep understanding of human nature. It was an age of meticulously crafted order, where the samurai transitioned from fierce warriors on the battlefield to vigilant administrators and refined scholars, ensuring the shogun's authority permeated every corner of the land. This intricately designed society, built on the principles of stability, clear hierarchy, and isolation, would now allow for the full flowering of a distinct samurai culture and daily life, which is where our gentle journey will take us next. Let us now delve much deeper into the transformation of the samurai, observing how their lives evolved during the long peace of the Edo period, and how their identity, forged on the battlefield, adapted to a world of profound order. Settle in, as we explore the intricate details of samurai culture and daily life. With the long and carefully kept peace of the Tokugawa shogunate, the very core of the samurai's existence slowly but profoundly changed. For hundreds of years, their identity, their reason for being, and their deepest sense of honor had been directly tied to the battlefield. Their lives were defined by the sound of clashing steel, the desire for conquest, and the defense of their lord. But now, in the calm of the Edo period, which lasted for over 2.5 centuries, the samurai were no longer warriors in the active, fighting sense. The great wars were over, replaced by a central government focused entirely on keeping the peace. Imagine them now, no longer simply camped on muddy battlefields, but living mainly in the bustling castle towns that had grown up around the daimyo's strongholds. And, most importantly, many lived in the new capital of Edo itself. Their job had shifted dramatically. They became the administrative backbone of the shogunate and the daimyo's domains. Their daily lives moved from the urgent pace of military campaigns to the measured rhythm of office work. They traded the clamor of war camps for the quiet focus of study rooms. They served as government workers, judges, police officers, tax collectors, and scholars. Their days were filled with official duties, reading reports, issuing official orders, and maintaining the complex social order. Their swords, while still carried as essential symbols of their high status, their soul, and their constant readiness, were usually kept in their scabbards, rarely drawn in anger or for combat. Yet, even in this long era of peace, the central ideas of their way of life were not forgotten. Instead, they were written down, made clearer, and deepened into what became known as bushido, the way of the warrior. This wasn't an old, unchanging set of rules passed down exactly the same way. Instead, it was a living philosophy that changed to fit the times. It blended moral teachings from Confucianism, deep insights from Zen Buddhism, and the reverence for purity found in Shinto beliefs. Bushido emphasized unwavering loyalty to one's lord, often meaning complete devotion. It stressed honor above all else, meaning personal honesty and the good name of one's family. It called for self-discipline, courage in difficult times, even if not on the battlefield, and a continuous, complete mastery of martial arts. These fighting skills were still practiced rigorously, even if they were rarely tested in actual combat. Frugality, being careful with money, stoicism, enduring hardship without complaint, and a dislike for showing off were also highly valued. Samurai were urged to avoid being extravagant and to face difficulties with quiet determination, showing a noble simplicity in their manner. The ultimate expression of honor, seppuku, or ritual suicide, remained a solemn but rarely performed option. It was a final act to preserve one's integrity, make up for failure, or protest injustice. It was performed with a careful, ritualized precision that highlighted its grave importance. The ideal samurai of the Edo period was therefore not just a master of the sword and bow, but also a deeply cultured gentleman. This embodied the concept of Bunbyu Ryodo, the dual path of the sword and the pen. Education became extremely important, a vital part of their identity and their jobs in government. Samurai were expected to be highly literate, meaning they could read and write well. They were also expected to know classic Japanese literature, Chinese poetry, history, and the philosophical ideas of Neo-Confucianism. They practiced calligraphy, where each brushstroke was seen as a reflection of their inner discipline and focus. They composed haiku and waka, short, evocative poems that captured fleeting moments of beauty, a deep connection to nature, and the gentle sadness of things that don't last forever. They engaged in the serene, meditative ritual of the tea ceremony, chanoyu, finding spiritual calm and an appreciation for beauty in its precise movements, its quiet contemplation, and its emphasis on harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. They cared for meticulously designed gardens for quiet reflection, appreciated the deep and symbolic no theater with its masked performers and slow, expressive movements, and practiced ikebana, the art of flower arranging, where each element was chosen for its symbolic meaning. These artistic pursuits were not simply hobbies. They were seen as essential for cultivating a disciplined mind, a refined spirit, and a sharp appreciation for beauty. All these qualities were considered crucial for effective leadership and a balanced character. Their daily life, while holding a privileged position, was also strictly controlled by laws and customs. Their distinctive appearance, with the shaved forelock and top-knot hairstyle, and the two swords, the long katana and the shorter wakizashi, worn clearly at the hip, immediately identified them as samurai. Their income was typically a fixed payment from their lord, often paid in koku, a measure of rice, rather than direct control over land. This payment, however, could be uncertain, especially for lower-ranking samurai. As the merchant class grew wealthier through the new peace and a money-based economy flourished, many samurai found themselves facing economic hardship. They struggled to maintain their dignity and high status amidst financial strain. Some, particularly those of lower ranks, quietly resorted to taking on side jobs like teaching, tutoring, or engaging in crafts, though such activities were often seen as beneath their noble station. Falling into debt to merchants became a common, humiliating burden. Despite the relative peace, the rigorous discipline of martial arts training continued strongly in dojo, training halls, across the land. Practicing kenjutsu, swordsmanship, jujitsu, unarmed combat, and kyudo, archery, remained central. This training wasn't necessarily for immediate combat, but for physical and mental cultivation, for maintaining their martial spirit, and for reinforcing their identity. The katana, the long sword, was revered as the soul of the samurai, cared for with an almost religious devotion, a constant reminder of their heritage. So, the samurai of the Edo period, while no longer engaged in constant warfare, lived lives of immense discipline, complex purpose, and often quiet struggle. They were the guardians of order, the upholders of tradition, and the living embodiment of a complex moral code. They were, in essence, Japan's ruling class, navigating a world that increasingly valued peace and stability over the raw chaos of conflict, a peace they were both the primary beneficiaries and the primary enforcers of. Their world, though undeniably male-dominated in terms of overt power and public roles, was also intricately supported, shaped, and influenced by the women within their society. And it is to their often unseen but vital contributions and their unique form of strength that our narrative now gently turns. Let us now gently turn our gaze to the often overlooked, yet profoundly important, lives of women within this structured samurai society, exploring their roles, their strengths, and the intricate tapestry they wove into the very fabric of feudal Japan. While the spotlight of history often falls, quite understandably, on the male samurai, their battles, their political maneuvers, and their administrative duties, their wives, mothers, and daughters played an equally vital, though often quieter, role in the intricate tapestry of feudal Japan. Their lives, while distinct from their male counterparts, were imbued with a unique form of strength, discipline, and profound dedication, especially within the samurai class. They were the silent pillars upon which the entire samurai society, and indeed much of feudal Japan, rested. In the earlier, more turbulent periods leading up to the Edo era, such as the chaotic Sengoku period, women sometimes took on surprisingly active and even martial roles. With their husbands and fathers constantly away at war, or even lost in battle, women of samurai families were frequently left to manage vast estates. They had to ensure the household's survival, oversee its finances, maintain its complex network of servants, and, when necessary, even defend their homes and families from attack. There are compelling historical accounts of onabugeisha, or female warriors, like the legendary Tomo Gozen from the Genpei War, famed for her exceptional skill with the naginata, a formidable pole weapon, archery, and swordsmanship. These women were not merely symbols. They were often trained in self-defense, basic military tactics, and the practical protection of their families and homes. They demonstrated fierce loyalty, unwavering courage, and sometimes formidable martial prowess when their castles were besieged or their lords were in peril. In these more fluid and dangerous times, their autonomy and influence in local affairs could be considerable, reflecting a necessity born of chaos rather than a strict social code. Think of Hojo Mosoko from the Kamakura period, a powerful matriarch who, though never a warrior herself, wielded immense political influence. She advised her husband, oversaw the succession, and subtly directed state affairs, sometimes referred to as the nun shogun for her powerful behind-the-scenes authority after her husband's death. However, as the Tokugawa shogunate ushered in an era of profound peace and a meticulously crafted social order, the roles of women within the samurai class became more formalized and, in many ways, more constrained by burgeoning Neo-Confucian ideals. The emphasis subtly but definitively shifted from martial readiness to domestic virtue and the precise, almost ritualistic, management of the household. Texts like Honor Daigaku, or Greater Learning for Women, became widely circulated. These books codified the idealized expectations for female conduct, unwavering obedience to one's father, then husband, and finally to one's sons. They stressed diligence in all household duties, and the cultivation of moral virtues such as modesty, humility, patience, and absolute self-control. This shift was a deliberate move to ensure internal stability, shaping women into custodians of domestic order rather than potential defenders of a besieged castle. Imagine the samurai wife as the vigilant and tireless guardian of the family's honor, prosperity, and daily rhythm within the home. She was typically responsible for the household finances, a daunting task with samurai stipends often fixed in rice. As the merchant economy grew and prices rose, these rice stipends often declined in real value, forcing wives to manage budgets very carefully, sometimes facing severe economic hardship. She managed the numerous servants, supervised the intricate daily rituals of the household, from meal preparation to ceremonial cleanliness, and, crucially, oversaw the children's education. This was especially true for her sons, who were destined to carry on the family name and legacy. This was a position of immense responsibility, demanding exceptional organizational skills, keen financial acumen, and a quiet but firm authority. She was expected to be the primary instructor of samurai values, instilling loyalty, honor, discipline, stoicism, and self-control into her children from their earliest years, preparing them for their future roles in society. For elite samurai women, education was still highly valued, though its focus was distinct from that of men. They were often literate, able to read and write classical Japanese literature, poetry, and family histories. Their cultural pursuits were not merely for personal enjoyment but were vital for maintaining the family's social standing and participating in the refined culture of the warrior class. They practiced calligraphy, where the precision of their brushstrokes reflected their inner discipline and focus. They composed waka and haiku, short, evocative poems that captured fleeting moments of beauty, a deep connection to nature, and the melancholic beauty of transient things. They engaged in the serene, meditative ritual of the tea ceremony, chinoyu, finding spiritual tranquility and aesthetic appreciation in its precise movements, its quiet contemplation, and its emphasis on harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. They also mastered ikebana, the art of flower arranging, where each element was chosen for its symbolic meaning. Sometimes, for personal solace and household entertainment, they practiced music, often on the koto, a stringed instrument, or shamisen, a three-stringed lute. These artistic and domestic skills were considered essential for a well-rounded samurai wife and for attracting a suitable marriage, as they indicated refinement and discipline. Indeed, marriages among samurai families were rarely based on romantic love. They were almost exclusively strategic alliances, meticulously arranged to cement political ties, consolidate power, and ensure economic stability between clans. The young woman entering such a marriage was expected to seamlessly transition into her new family, embodying unwavering loyalty to her husband's lineage above her own birth family. Her paramount duty within this new household was often to produce an heir, especially a male one, to ensure the continuity of the family line. The pressure to provide a male successor was immense, as the very existence of the family depended on it. Despite the formal dictates of male superiority and the external limitations placed upon them by Neo-Confucian rules, many samurai women wielded significant, though often unseen, influence behind the scenes. They were frequently trusted advisors to their husbands, confidential figures who could subtly shape decisions, offering private counsel that might sway important family or political matters. They often became powerful matriarchs who commanded immense respect within the extended family structure. Older women, particularly mothers-in-law, often held considerable authority, sometimes having the final say on domestic matters and even influencing succession choices within the clan. Their strength lay not in public display, but in their impeccable conduct, their ability to maintain the family's reputation through their own virtue and grace under pressure, and their indispensable role in ensuring the stability, continuity, and internal harmony of the samurai household through generations. Their lives were not without significant challenge, requiring immense inner strength, unwavering stoicism, and graceful endurance under pressure. They embodied a quiet dignity, a profound resilience that mirrored the samurai spirit, yet was adapted to the confines of the domestic sphere. They were the silent pillars upon which the entire samurai class, and indeed much of feudal Japan, rested. Their contributions, though often unsung in official histories, were fundamental to the endurance and character of the Edo period. Yet, even in this era of meticulously managed peace, tensions subtly simmered beneath the surface. The strict controls and rigid hierarchy of the Tokugawa system, while bringing stability, also created pressures that would inevitably lead to resistance and conflict from various quarters, setting the stage for future changes. Our journey now takes us into these complex dynamics of rebellion and control in feudal Japan. The Tokugawa Shogunate, as we have seen, built its long peace upon a foundation of meticulous control. Every aspect of society, from the highest daimyo to the humblest peasant, was integrated into a rigid hierarchy and governed by extensive laws. The Sankenkeitai system kept the daimyo financially constrained and loyal. The strict social stratification, the Shinokeosho, aimed to prevent social mobility and maintain order. And the Sengoku policy tightly sealed Japan's borders, preventing the influx of potentially destabilizing foreign ideas, particularly Christianity. Yet, even the most carefully constructed systems of control face challenges. Human nature, economic pressures, and the sheer desire for autonomy inevitably lead to resistance, sometimes subtle, sometimes explosive. The most significant early challenge to the Tokugawa's authority, and one that profoundly solidified their isolation policy, was the Shimabara Rebellion of 1637 to 1638. Imagine a region in Kyushu, where the persecution of Christians, combined with severe famine and oppressive taxation, pushed the local peasantry to a breaking point. Led by a charismatic young Christian named Amakusa Sher, a desperate uprising of peasants and masterless samurai, ronin, many of whom were Christian, took root. They fortified themselves in Hara Castle and bravely resisted the shogunate's overwhelming forces for months. The rebellion was brutally suppressed, resulting in the massacre of tens of thousands. This event confirmed the shogunate's deepest fears about the destabilizing influence of Christianity and external ideas, leading to the complete enforcement of the Sengoku policy and a ruthless purge of any remaining Christian presence. Beyond this major uprising, the long Edo period saw countless smaller, localized expressions of discontent, primarily from the most numerous and fundamental class, the peasants. These were the Hayakusho Ikki, or peasant uprisings. Imagine farmers, driven to desperation by heavy taxes, crop failures, or corrupt officials, gathering together, often presenting petitions, sometimes resorting to mass protests or even direct action against the local authorities. These were rarely attempts to overthrow the shogunate itself, but rather pleas for relief, demanding fair treatment or a reduction in taxes. The shogunate's response could be brutal suppression, but often, local officials would be replaced or minor concessions made, recognizing the need to maintain a degree of stability and prevent widespread famine that could lead to even greater unrest. In the rapidly growing urban centers, particularly Edo and Osaka, the burgeoning merchant and artisan classes also experienced hardship, especially during times of famine or economic instability. This led to achikawashi, or house-smashing riots, where crowds, often driven by hunger, would target and destroy the homes or shops of wealthy rice merchants and moneylenders whom they perceived as exploiting their misery. These were typically spontaneous outbursts of anger aimed at immediate relief, rather than organized revolutions. The samurai themselves, though at the top of the social hierarchy, were not immune to discontent. Many ronin, masterless samurai who had lost their lords during the unification wars or due to subsequent shogunate policies, struggled with poverty and a loss of purpose. While most found ways to adapt, some, like the famous incident involving the 47 ronin, or the broader, though ultimately unsuccessful, Heian uprising of 1651, highlight moments of disaffection and a yearning for a return to a more honorable warrior ideal. The shogunate kept a wary eye on this potentially destabilizing element, often issuing edicts to encourage their integration into society or providing means for them to find new service. The Tokugawa shogunate utilized a complex web of laws, such as the Bushido, laws for warrior houses, which strictly regulated the conduct of daimyo, limiting their castle construction, controlling marriages, and even dictating their dress code. An extensive network of metsuki, inspectors, and spies ensured that any hint of disloyalty or transgression was reported back to Edo. This was a state built on surveillance and deterrence. Despite these controls, the long peace itself began to create new tensions. The rigid social structure, while maintaining order, stifled ambition in some quarters. The merchant class, despite its low social standing, accumulated significant wealth, while many samurai, living on fixed stipends, found themselves in financial difficulty. These underlying currents of change and dissatisfaction would subtly shape the later years of the Edo period. And so, as the centuries of peace progressed, new challenges and opportunities began to emerge within this tightly controlled system. The seeds of both continuity and eventual transformation were being sown, leading us to the nuances of the middle to late Edo period. As Japan settled into its long era of peace, the minds of its scholars and thinkers were far from still. Beneath the surface of the shogunate's rigid social structure, a vibrant and diverse intellectual landscape began to unfold. These were not always revolutionary ideas, but rather quiet evolutions and deep explorations, often drawing from ancient wisdom while subtly laying the groundwork for future change. At the very core of the shogunate's ideology, providing its moral and administrative framework, was Neo-Confucianism. Imported centuries earlier from China, this philosophy was now the bedrock of the samurai class. Imagine a world where the principles of hierarchy, loyalty, filial piety, and proper social conduct were not just abstract ideas, but the very fabric of daily life and governance. Scholars like Hayashi Razan and later Arai Hakuseki served the shogunate, articulating and refining these principles, which emphasized a rational, ethical government based on moral rectitude and social harmony. Neo-Confucianism taught that each person had a specific role and duty, and that societal order stemmed from fulfilling these roles with integrity. It provided a powerful justification for the shogunate's centralized rule and the samurai's position at the top of the social hierarchy, reinforcing the idea of a stable, virtuous society. Education for samurai heavily revolved around mastering these texts, instilling discipline and a sense of duty. Yet, even as Neo-Confucianism flourished, a distinct and uniquely Japanese intellectual movement began to gain momentum, kokugaku, or national learning. This current emerged from a growing desire to rediscover Japan's own authentic spirit, untainted by centuries of Chinese and Buddhist influence. Imagine scholars like Moturi Norinaga poring over ancient Japanese texts, the Kojiki, the Manyoshu, and classical poetry, seeking to unearth a pure Japanese essence. Their aim was to understand the indigenous beliefs of Shinto, the way of the gods, and to appreciate the unique beauty and spirit of ancient Japanese literature and mythology. Kokugaku scholars emphasized emotion, intuition, and the natural world, in contrast to the rationalism of Neo-Confucianism. Though not overtly political at first, this movement had a subtle yet profound implication. By venerating Japan's unique past and the divine lineage of the emperor, it implicitly questioned the legitimacy of the shogunate, which ruled in the emperor's name but without his direct authority. It fostered a powerful sense of national identity and pride, focusing on Japan's singular historical and cultural path. And then, a third, equally profound current flowed from the most unexpected source, a crack in the Sakoku policy. This was Rangaku, or Dutch learning. Despite the strict isolation, a small, tightly controlled window to the Western world remained open through the Dutch trading post in Nagasaki. Imagine courageous and curious Japanese scholars, sometimes risking severe punishment, meticulously studying Dutch scientific and medical texts that were painstakingly translated, word by word, from the few foreigners allowed entry. Figures like Sugita Genpaku, who famously translated a Dutch anatomy text after witnessing a dissection, revolutionized Japanese medicine. They encountered Western astronomy, cartography, military science, and even some aspects of philosophy. This was a quiet intellectual revolution, empirical observation and rational inquiry, based on evidence, directly challenged traditional knowledge and authority. Rangaku exposed a small but influential group of Japanese thinkers to the advancements of the Western world, hinting at a global landscape far more complex and powerful than their isolated nation had imagined. It spurred a thirst for practical knowledge and sowed the seeds of doubt about Japan's complete self-sufficiency. Beyond these major currents, other thoughts simmered. Some Buddhist schools continued to evolve, and new philosophical debates arose, often blending with Confucian or Shinto ideas. There was also the Mitagaku school, centered around the Meito domain, which championed intense loyalty to the imperial house and emphasized Japanese history and national character, blending elements of Confucianism and Kokugaku. This school, in particular, would later provide a crucial intellectual foundation for those who sought to restore imperial power. These intellectual currents, though seemingly disparate, were all intertwined. They represented a society deeply engaged in self-reflection, grappling with its own history, its place in the world, and the nature of proper governance. The samurai, in their newfound administrative roles, were often at the forefront of these studies, grappling with the tension between their practical duties and their evolving understanding of their own identity and their nation's destiny. The quiet debates among scholars, the secret translations of foreign texts, and the rediscovery of ancient myths were not merely academic exercises. They were living ideas, slowly but surely eroding the foundations of the shogunate's rigid order, shaping the consciousness of a nation that would soon be forced to confront a world far larger than its island shores. These profound intellectual shifts, alongside growing internal pressures and an increasingly demanding external world, would culminate in a dramatic reckoning. The long era of peace, so carefully constructed, would eventually reach its inevitable conclusion. Our final chapter will now gently guide us through the end of an era, decline, restoration, and legacy. All right, we have journeyed through the rise and fall of clans, the grand aspirations of shoguns, and the intricate daily lives that shaped this island nation. Now, as our long journey nears its gentle close, we come to the final chapter of feudal Japan, its decline, its remarkable restoration, and the enduring legacy that echoes even today. As the 19th century dawned, the carefully constructed peace of the Tokugawa Shogunate, which had spanned over 2.5 centuries, began to show cracks under mounting internal and external pressures. Internally, the economic system struggled. The samurai, once the proud warrior elite, found their fixed stipends increasingly inadequate in a cash-based economy dominated by wealthy merchants. Many faced debt and a loss of practical purpose, leading to widespread dissatisfaction within the ruling class itself. Social rigidity, while maintaining order, also stifled innovation and bred discontent among ambitious commoners and lower-ranking samurai. The intellectual currents we explored, particularly Kokugaku, with its emphasis on imperial reverence and unique Japanese identity, and Rangaku, which hinted at a powerful and technologically advanced Western world, subtly chipped away at the shogunate's legitimacy and the nation's self-imposed isolation. The shogunate's attempts at conservative reforms were often too little, too late, failing to address the deep-seated structural issues. Then, the external pressure arrived, not as a gentle stream, but as a thundering wave. In 1853, and again in 1854, the imposing black ships of United States Commodore Matthew C. Perry appeared in Edo Bay. Their advanced steam-powered vessels and formidable armaments were a stark symbol of Western technological superiority and an undeniable challenge to Japan's centuries of self-imposed isolation. Perry, acting on behalf of the American government, demanded that Japan open its ports to trade and diplomatic relations. The shogunate, after much agonizing debate, was forced to sign unequal treaties that granted significant concessions to Western powers. This act of opening Japan, against the backdrop of its long isolation, sent shockwaves through the nation. It deeply humiliated the shogunate, exposing its military weakness and its inability to resist foreign demands. This humiliation ignited a powerful nationalist movement among many samurai and daimyo, encapsulated by the rallying cry, "Sono Joy, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians." The period that followed, known as the Bakumatsu, or end of the shogunate, was one of intense political turmoil and civil unrest. Powerful Tazama domains, like Satsuma and Choshu, who had long chafed under Tokugawa rule, seized the opportunity. They allied themselves with the imperial court in Kyoto, pushing for the shogun's overthrow and the restoration of direct imperial rule. Clashes erupted between shogunate forces and pro-emperor factions. Finally, in 1867, the last Tokugawa shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, recognizing the futility of further resistance, voluntarily resigned, returning political power to the emperor. This pivotal event, known as the Taisei Hoken, return of power, was swiftly followed by the formal Meiji Restoration in 1868. This was not merely a change in government, it was a profound revolution orchestrated by a young, reform-minded elite, largely composed of lower-ranking samurai from the victorious domains. The new Meiji government, determined to modernize Japan and avoid the fate of other Asian nations colonized by Western powers, moved with astonishing speed. They abolished the feudal domains and replaced them with prefectures, consolidating centralized power. And perhaps most significantly, they brought about the dramatic end of the samurai class itself. The samurai's traditional stipends were abolished, their right to wear swords in public was revoked, and the privileged status they had held for centuries was dissolved. A new national conscript army, open to all classes, replaced the samurai's military monopoly. While many samurai adapted, becoming civil servants, entrepreneurs, or educators, some resisted. The most famous of these was the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by the legendary Saigo Takamori, a final, tragic, and ultimately futile stand by the last true samurai against the tide of modernization. With this, the age of the samurai, and indeed, of feudal Japan, finally came to its quiet close. Yet, the legacy of this extraordinary era, and of the samurai themselves, did not vanish. Their values of discipline, loyalty, honor, diligence, and self-sacrifice were internalized and redirected towards the nation. The very spirit of the samurai, adapted and transformed, became a driving force behind Japan's astonishingly rapid modernization and its emergence as a major world power. Their artistic traditions, their philosophical depth, and their unique way of life continue to captivate and influence. And so, our long journey through the history of the samurai and feudal Japan comes to an end. We have seen a nation emerge from mist and myth, witness the rise of warrior power, experience centuries of meticulously managed peace, and finally, transform into a modern state. The echoes of distant temple bells, the rustle of silken robes, and the faint clang of a warrior's sword have guided us through this remarkable tale. As the final chapters of this ancient story gently close, may your mind be filled with the quiet beauty and profound resilience of a land shaped by honor and tradition. Allow the gentle currents of history to carry you now into a peaceful and restorative rest. Good night.